We're going to dive into a paradox that pretty much affects everyone, from a top-tier athlete to, well, anyone who's ever just stared at the ceiling all night. It's the strange truth about how we perform and find peace. Sometimes, the harder you actually try, the worse things get. So we're going to figure out why that happens and what to do about it.
So let's just get right to the heart of this puzzle. I mean, we've all been there, right? You want something so badly. You want to win the game, you want to nail a presentation, or for goodness sake, just fall asleep. And the more desperately you try, the further away it seems to slip. Why does that happen?
Well, this really frustrating thing, it actually has a name, the effort trap. It's that completely counterintuitive zone where doubling down and trying harder with your conscious mind doesn't just not help, it actively messes things up. Just think about it for a second. You're lying in bed, your mind is racing, and you're just screaming at yourself inside, sleep, just fall asleep. But the very act of trying to sleep, of monitoring yourself for signs of sleep, is exactly what keeps your brain on high alert. You're literally thinking yourself awake. Or here's another classic example. An athlete, right? They've perfected a skill. We're talking thousands and thousands of hours of practice. It's automatic. It's totally fluid. But then, in that one crucial moment of the big game, they start thinking about it. Thinking about the angle of their elbow or where their feet are, and poof, just like that, that smooth, automatic skill just breaks down.
So here's the bottom line. The effort trap is what happens when our conscious, analytical mind gets in the way of our deeply practiced automatic skills. It's basically like trying to manually fly a plane that's already on autopilot. You just end up fighting the system.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what in the world is the solution? Well, it turns out the answer isn't new at all. It's an ancient idea, a really powerful principle that just flips our whole modern hustle-harder culture completely on its head.
The writer Aldous Huxley gave this idea a name that really stuck, the law of reversed effort. And this concept goes directly against all our instincts. It tells us that for certain things, the path to success isn't about using more force, but through a kind of active, intentional letting go. But Huxley was really just tapping into a much, much older idea. In Taoist philosophy, they call it Wu Wei. Now, this isn't about being lazy or just giving up. It's about smart, effortless action. It's the art of knowing when you should push, and maybe more importantly, when to let go and just move with the current instead of trying to swim against it. There's this classic story that just illustrates it perfectly. A martial arts student just full of ambition promises his teacher he's going to train harder than anybody. But the master knows that this kind of frantic obsession, this over-effort, is only going to create tension and actually block the student's path. The real road to mastery needs patience and flow, not just brute force.
Now, this isn't just some old philosophy. There's a really clear reason inside our brains for why we fumble under pressure. So let's pop the hood and look at the science of what psychologists call choking. So, what's really going on inside our heads when this happens? Well, you can think of it like a turf war. When we choke, two really powerful but very different systems in our brain are literally fighting for control. Okay, so on one side you have your implicit system. Let's call it the pro. This is where all your highly practiced skills live. Think muscle memory. It's super fast, it's automatic, and it doesn't need you to think about it. But on the other side is the explicit system, the overthinker. This is your conscious, analytical mind. Now, when you're performing a skill you've already mastered, the pro should be driving. The effort trap happens when the overthinker panics, grabs the steering wheel, and causes that dreaded paralysis by analysis.
Okay, so we get it. We need to let the pro do its job. But how? How do we actually do that in real life? Well, an educator named Eduardo Briceño gives us a fantastic modern framework that breaks this all down into two clear, distinct zones of activity.
And this framework solves what he calls the performance paradox. And here's the weird paradox. If we spend all of our time just trying to perform perfectly, we actually stop getting better. Our skills just hit a wall because we're never giving ourselves the space to experiment, to fail, and to learn from it. So here are the two zones. First, you've got the learning zone. This is when your one and only goal is to get better. This is where you practice deliberately, you try new things, and you actually welcome mistakes because they're just feedback. And then there's the performance zone. Here, the goal is totally different. It's simply to execute. You're not trying to learn something new, you're trusting your training and just letting your skills flow. Real mastery comes from knowing which zone you're in and acting like it. This modern framework is super powerful, but the wisdom behind it is, well, it's timeless.
We can actually see these two zones, action and stillness, performing and learning, playing out in some of the oldest and most powerful stories we have.
Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. A man is beaten up and just left for dead on the side of the road. A priest and a Levite, both religious experts, they pass right by him. Why? Because they're stuck overthinking. They're worried about religious rules and purity. Their overthinker brain takes over, and they're paralyzed.
But then the Samaritan comes along. He doesn't hesitate, he doesn't overthink it, he sees the immediate need, and he snaps instantly into the performance zone. He just acts. And that's the absolute essence of pure execution. You see the need, and you move. Now let's look at the flip side of that coin with the story of two sisters, Mary and Martha. When Jesus comes to their home, Martha is all action, but it's anxious, distracted action. She's stuck in a frantic performance mode. But Mary chooses a different path. She sits, she listens, she receives. She intentionally puts herself in the learning zone because she understands that sometimes the most important action you can take is to be still.
So, what do we get when we put all of this together? The effort trap, the law of reversed effort, the brain science, these two zones, and these timeless stories. Well, what we get is a pretty clear path to mastering our own presence.
So the single most important takeaway here is this. It's not about trying less or avoiding effort altogether. It's about applying the right kind of effort at the right time. It's about knowing when to be Martha, to execute and get things done, and when to be Mary, to be still, to listen, and to learn.
So here's your roadmap. First, just learn to recognize that frantic, straining feeling. That's the effort trap. Then embrace reversed effort. Try combining focused action with relaxation. Be intentional about your zones. Decide if you're there to learn or to perform. And when it's time to perform, you've got to trust your training and just let go. In any moment, choose to be present, not to panic.
And that really just leaves us with one last question to think about for ourselves. In your own life, in your work, in your passions, how will you intentionally create that space for the learning zone? And how will you give yourself the permission to simply let go and perform when the moment comes?
Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can possibly do is to simply be still. Thanks for joining us.